Welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, very happy to have on the show for the first time, Casey Pick, the Director of Law and Policy at the Trevor Project. Casey, thank you for being on. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. So tell people, I'm sure most people have heard of the Trevor Project. Some might know what you do, some might not. Can you share what is the mission of the Trevor Project?
The mission of the Trevor Project, plain and simple, is to end suicide among LGBTQ plus youth. So for 27 years, we have been the nation's leading provider of suicide prevention and crisis intervention services for our LGBTQ young folks via telephone, chat, and text, 24/7, 365 days a year.
And have you seen, I mean, what can you share for people who don't know? Like if someone is a teen and they're gay or they're transgender, is there an increased incident of suicidal attempts, ideation, as opposed to cisgender straight people who are teens?
So we know that there is a mental health crisis among young people today. So suicide is the second leading cause of death for youth right now.
Wow.
But for LGBTQ youth, they are at heightened risk. They are 4 times as likely, according to the Center for Disease Control's over the years, to report having a suicide attempt, to be harmed by a suicide attempt, or even hospitalized. 4 times as high compared to their straight or non-transgender peers.
And so, we're going to talk about the Tennessee case in a second, but what does the study say about teens who are transgender, who do get gender affirming care in terms of real life impact on them and potential even self-harm? And does it have an impact in a good way if they're getting the care that they need?
I love the way you framed this, talking about the benefits that we see for youth who get the healthcare that they, their families, and their doctors think that they need and deserve, and we know that they deserve. We know that the lived experience of these youth who are able to access this healthcare is lower rates of suicidality, lower rates of depression and anxiety, and also higher rates of just self-satisfaction, of measurements of well-being, of liking their lives, liking their bodies. And these are things that many of us take for granted,
Right.
that are almost miraculous for many trans youth.
Yeah, and I imagine it's similar for adults as well. Like to broaden it out for a second. I mean, I had on my show Harper Steele, who did a whole Netflix documentary with Will Ferrell. And I worked with Harper at Saturday Night Live. And before Harper transitioned, not happy. I mean, I know her, I can say that, and Harper knows that and talks about in the documentary that had a lot of thoughts of self-harm. And now, after transitioning, I'm not going to say giddy, but certainly happy. And finally being the person that she always knew that she should have been from youth, and the conflict for that in an adult. And as someone, she transitioned to her 60s. I can't even imagine for a teen who's not yet adjusted as to where they fit in the world and life without getting the care they deserve, and the challenges they must be facing is unparalleled.
Absolutely. And when I say youth, at the Trevor Project, our research and our services, we tend to think as being about 25 and under.
Okay.
So that does also include your young adults, your folks who are in college, who are just starting out in their careers, starting out in their lives. And yeah, absolutely, we see that sort of impact as well among our young adult population. But yeah, everybody's experience is unique and different. And I certainly don't want to suggest that access to transition-related care is some kind of cure-all,
Right.
or that it makes life easy, especially now. It's a tough time to be trans. It's a tough time to be LGBTQ. But I can say that for those who their families, their doctors, that this is the prescription, being able to get access to that is life-changing and in some cases life-saving.
And you mentioned the word prescription. Can you share with people about teens or youth under 25 who are getting any kind of gender affirming care? Does it involve always with a doctor? Is there a prescription involved? Just in case people don't know. And maybe we can take a step back for a second. Could you define what gender affirming care is And then we can talk about like, how is it over the counter, or is it something they always have to get a prescription from a doctor?
Sure. So there are lots of things that go into what is sometimes called gender affirming care. I just call it healthcare.
Right.
Uh, and that can look different for each individual, but it also looks different across the lifetime. So if we're talking about young kids, and we know that there are trans youth who identify clearly and strongly with their gender, sometimes really young, 3, 4 years old. But for young kids, prepubescent, gender affirming care or healthcare just means a social transition.
Hmm.
So that would mean name, pronouns, clothing, haircut, just respecting and acknowledging a person's identity. Uh, Even as you get older, lots of this kind of healthcare isn't doesn't require a prescription at all. You're often looking at therapy, counseling, that ongoing social support. But if you get into the medical space, uh,
Hmm.
then you do get into a standard of care that has decades of research and clinical practical experience behind it, that makes it what is endorsed by every major medical and mental health organization. So, just to start off with, there are standards, there are protocols, there are lots of steps. This is not a fast or easy process. It can look like medications to pause puberty, uh,
Hmm.
for when a young person who identifies consistently, insistently, and persistently as a gender other than what they're assigned at birth. You can pause the puberty, and that is reversible. That can then eventually, in many cases, shift into hormones. So, having the hormones that are consistent with your gender identity, that have that kind of impact on your development, your appearance. Ultimately, for legal adults, you run into surgical procedures as well. There are some cases in which you might see surgery for somebody who's a minor, what's referred to as top surgery or breast reduction surgery. What is often overlooked is that most of those kinds of surgeries that are done on minors are done on cisgender, non-transgender youth. So all of these things, it's personalized, it is worked out carefully in collaboration, families and doctors and patients. You know who's not in that room though, and shouldn't be? Politicians.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm chatting with Casey Pick, Director of Law and Policy, Trevor Project. And it's also interesting you mentioned that the puberty blockers are reversible, and that, can you share a little about that? Because there's still so much lack of information, misinformation, but a lack of information often among what is gender affirming care? What does it really mean? Because some people think, oh, it's surgery right away. And I'm glad you pointed out what it is as a practical matter. But that the idea of, well, if someone's 15 or 16 and they make a mistake and they delay puberty, have they made a mistake that's irreversible? But you just mentioned it's reversible. So I just wanted you to touch on that, please.
Sure. I mean, we're having this conversation because of the Supreme Court decision in
Mm-hmm.
Germany. And
Mm-hmm.
this was actually one of those topics that really went all through the case, is the reality that something like puberty blockers is in this case, in the law at issue, puberty blockers are banned if you're doing so for gender transition reasons, but they are entirely legal for other young people, the vast majority of young people who take them, for a wide range of other reasons that are provided for medical purposes. Precocious puberty, puberty being onset earlier than you would want to see it, or other kinds of ailments. So these are medications in all of these treatments that are taken for a lot of different reasons. They're not new, they're not experimental, and we know their impacts. And so it's just when it comes down to why are we denying them to this one population of trans youth when that's what their families and their doctors are prescribing, it's coming down to politics. So just don't need to get into the science of it, don't need to get into the
Right.
chemistry of it. That's not my thing, and it's probably not most folks' thing. That's why we have doctors. And in this case, we know what these medications do, we know how to treat them, we know where there are side effects, and we know how to mitigate side effects. None of this is as scary as it's being made out to be.
there are bad faith actors, obviously, as we know, who are trying to make it scary on the right because it plays well for their base, unfortunately. So, you mentioned Supreme Court decision last week. The U.S. Supreme Court 6-3 decision upheld the Tennessee law restricting gender transition care for minors. And so what will be the real world impact of this? And can you explain too, now that this decision is for Tennessee, what about the 20 plus other states that have a similar type of bans? What will happen?
Certainly. So, first thing I want to say about the impact of this is that the decision that this law in Tennessee is constitutional should have no legal impact on any state that doesn't have a similar ban already in place. So, if you are in a state that does not ban this care, you should still be able to receive that care. Unfortunately, I say should because we know that there are some providers, some clinics that are complying in advance, frankly, who are declaring that they won't provide this care out of concern about political pressure. But from what the law says and does, if you are in one of the 25 or so states that doesn't have a ban, your access should remain consistent. But let's talk about those states that do. The way the court came down on this decision, the fact that they went through it and said somehow that a ban on gender affirming care is not a law that is based on sex, that discriminates based on sex. They said it has nothing to do with sex whatsoever. This is all about age and the medical use. Because of that, there are some courts that have found, no, this is an issue of sex discrimination. That means that it needs to be evaluated under intermediate scrutiny. And so bans in our places that meet those standards, those bans are similarly still going to be enjoined where they're enjoined. I think it's Arkansas and Montana. So those are operating under different case law. But unfortunately, we are left in a situation where you have about 20 states that have bans in place that are going to be similar to Tennessee's. And as a result, we are seeing a restriction on access to healthcare. What is the lived experience of that for our young people? Many youth are scared. There are many who had healthcare, had this medication, who very much want to keep it, who are having a positive experience. They and their families are having to make some hard decisions about how to maintain that care if they can. Many families of trans youth are thinking about relocating, moving to a different state, some moving to different countries in order to be able to maintain access to that care. Of course, there are many young people whose families simply aren't in a position to do that, to uproot your entire life, to move to a different place. We have jobs, we have communities, we have responsibilities. So that's really hard. You have young people who were going through the process. Like I said, this long, often arduous process, many doctor's appointments, who were looking at the potential of getting their healthcare as a light at the end of a tunnel, who are now fighting to hold on to hope. And those are the youth who are reaching out to organizations like the Trevor Project. They're reaching out to us because of fear, because of despair. And it is our job now as the adults who surround these youth to do all we can to hold them up, to encourage them, to remind them that, yes, life is worth living, and that every problem has a solution. And these are temporary problems.
It is challenging times. I can't even imagine what it's like, because it's not just the personal struggles you might have. It's added by the animus and the hate spewed by some on the right, elected officials, people who should know better, who are community leaders, so to speak, adding to a situation. Are you concerned? Because again, the animus by the right towards transgender doesn't stop at teens. I mean, it is ugly. Do you think they'll try to, in some way, limit the access of adults to gender affirming care going forward?
The reality is we are already seeing attacks on adults' ability to access this healthcare. The report released by the Department of Health and Human Services earlier this year makes a case claiming that the healthcare standards for all ages are not sufficient, according to a deeply unscientific anonymous report out of HHS. But that report, some of the executive orders that we have seen, some legal proposals that we have seen, everything from denying the ability of Medicaid to pay for gender affirming care, to our military, where our veterans are no longer able to access this. Veterans who are adults, who have served our country well, that fact that they are losing access to their health care because it is government controlled is truly a travesty.
When they say, oh, we're concerned about teens and young people, that's how they try to frame it. But in reality, they have their own view on life and try to impose on all of us. And we've seen it now here. We've seen it with the anniversary of overturning Roe v. Wade, with the Dobbs decision that we're just at now, and then turning their religion into law, or at least their interpretation into law. There was something else, Casey, that happened last week, actually on the same day, and it was just jaw-dropping to me. The Trump administration ending a National Suicide Prevention Hotline for the LGBTQ youth that the Trevor Project is actually involved in. Before we talk about what the impact is of ending it, can you share a little bit about what the role was, Trevor Project, and what this Lifeline for people did?
Certainly. So folks have known that there's a National Suicide Prevention Lifeline for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But before it was changed to 988, it was a 10-digit number that even those of us who work in suicide prevention may not have had memorized. It was a number that you would see floating around social media after a tragedy. But there was a bipartisan consensus back in 2018, 2019, that the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline needed to become more accessible. It needed to be significantly strengthened, much better funded. And so there was a bipartisan strong consensus on creating the Lifeline as 988, and also including specialized services for some of the most at-risk populations. And so what was created was a situation where you could call 988 in a moment of crisis, and that this would be the number posted everywhere. It
Right.
was promoted by our government. You'd see it in bridges, subways. That's the number that everyone would know of. If you're in a mental health crisis, call 988.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you were a veteran, you could press 1 to be connected into the Veterans Lifeline. For Spanish language services, press 2. And for LGBTQ youth, press 3. That went into effect after being signed into law by President Trump, I'll note. Yes, but that went into effect in 2022. So for the first year, it was a pilot program, and Trevor was the sole organization answering those calls at Press 3. It was such a success in the sense that so many people reached out to the line, made use of it. It blew through government estimates on what people were going to respond to this, that it became a permanent part of 988, we hoped, such that there is a subnetwork now. It's us, it's 6 other organizations. And since 2022, 1.4 million contacts have been served through that specialized line.
Wow.
Context, the overall of 988 in that same general window is about 13 million. So we're actually serving about 10% of the contact volume into 988. And it's been increasing in demand, increasing in use, not just every year, but every month since.
So now that Trump, and I saw they gave it 30 days and they're going to end it, what's going to happen if people call this hotline and they're in the LGBTQ community, especially if they're a young person? What will happen? Who can they talk to?
So what will happen as of July 18th?
Mm-hmm.
Because the line, we were notified that it will stop July 17th at 11:59 p.m. As of July 18th, probably what will happen is you will call 988 and you will be given the menu of options that will stop at 2. So that said, of course, LGBTQ folks can still call 988 and be routed within the general line. But the difference is they will not be connected into somebody who has hours and hours of specialized training and a special commitment to hear and understand the needs of LGBTQ people. Um, and we know, unfortunately, many LGBTQ folks have had really negative experiences on mainstream lines, even from well-intended folks.
Mhm.
Just imagine how it feels. You're at the end of your rope. You call into a line hoping that somebody will hear you and understand. And they make an assumption based on the sound of your voice and they call you sir instead of ma'am.
Right.
It can be devastating. And that's not even leaving aside any actual discrimination you might face intentionally.
I mean, as someone from outside the community looking into what they're doing, it seems like they want to erase the LGBTQ community. Like if they're okay with people killing themselves, youth or adults who are part of this community, they they don't view it with humanity at all. I mean, that's my view. You tell me.
It is certainly a hard thing to stomach.
Right.
Uh, I won't say they don't care if people die. I don't want to have that assumption about anybody, but it was certainly an ugly moment to be told that they were taking away this resource, a resource that we know is successfully saving lives. And even in the moment of so doing, the letter said the LGB plus community would no
Mhm.
longer be, quote, siloed into a separate line. In the moment of taking away a resource, they couldn't bring themselves to say transgender or queer, the T and the Q. And what is most important to me, I'm not going to speculate about their motives.
Okay.
What's important to me is reminding all of our young people that no matter what letter gets left off an acronym, you can't be erased. You're still here, you still matter, we still see you. And that's part of what I absolutely want to emphasize is while it looks like Trevor's role as a government as a contractor to
Mhm.
988 may come to an end in a few weeks, the Trevor Project remains. We are still there. Young people can still reach out to us 24/7, 365, telephone, chat, or text. Go to thetrevorproject.org/get help to find those specific numbers.
I was going to ask you that the specific thing about what can people do, and the last thing, what can we do? People outside of the community who are allies during a very difficult time, and I think it's going to get more challenging in the next few years. They on the right, they are so emboldened. And I think overturning Roe v. Wade played a big role in that. They set out a goal and they did it. And I think now to try to turn America into some kind of right-wing evangelical Disneyland that only they'll have tickets to is part of the dream. And I think they're really emboldened to make this happen. So we're all of us who not in their vision, and I'm not, I'm Muslim. What should we be doing to work together to fight against this?
A lot of what's going on right now that seems to have power in the story, in the narrative, is this idea that, well, everybody feels that way. So the narrative that is being put out there, this misinformation, especially about, let's say, trans people, the idea of, well, you might accept them, but most people around you don't. That's not true. We know it from the polling. We know that it's there, but people feel alone in being supportive. And so this is when it's a hard time to do it because there's so much mitigating against it, but we need to speak out. So allies in particular, let's take it back to 988. Now is a really good time to talk about, hey, did you know that the suicide line was there? I might not understand everything there is to know about, what we were talking about earlier, transgender healthcare, but
Mhm.
I understand that life matters, that suicide is about people, not politics. And I want this protection to still be there. Like, if you're saying that to your neighbors, to your lawmakers, then you're in really good company, by the way. We did a poll, 70% of Americans don't want the 988 specialized services to go away. 70%.
Right.
And that includes a majority of Republicans. So right now, it's about what kind of community, what kind of culture do we want to be? And we can still make changes here. The president has made his choice in terms of sending that instruction to us to wind down services in less than 30 days. Congress still holds the power of the purse. And so it is important for people to reach out to their lawmakers, say, I care about this. I care about my trans neighbors. I care about my kids' trans classmates. We're there and call that out. And also, it's not just trans folks. LGB, you're not getting out unscathed here. So we all need to stand together. We need to speak out. If the 988 issue is something that you particularly care about, hit up the trevorproject.org/save988. Sign our petition that we are sharing with lawmakers. And in the comments, share your story of why something like 988 and suicide prevention matters. We're reading every comment, and they are so incredibly helpful.
Casey, thank you. This was really helpful. And I also love that you shared with people a call to action and what they can actually do about it. And it's so vitally important. So I wish you the best, the Trevor Project. And, I look forward to chatting with you in the future. We are allies, and we're going to continue to fight for the good, the better angels of all of us as human beings, as America. And so have a great night. And thanks so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.